Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Alberta, through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying small-town horror stories ever recorded. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Alberta, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened when I was 26, living on the outskirts of Cold Lake, Alberta. I moved there for work. Oil logistics, long hours, good pay, and a promise of quiet nights. I grew up believing small towns were safer, slower, untouched by the chaos of cities. I was wrong. My rental sat near a tree line that locals avoided. They said it was just superstition, but they also never walked there after dark. Every evening, the forest swallowed sound in a way I'd never experienced. No insects, no wind. Just silence so thick it felt intentional. My closest neighbor, Mark, warned me my first week. He wasn't dramatic, just tired. He told me people here didn't disappear loudly. They faded, jobs abandoned, homes left unlocked, trucks still running in driveways. I laughed it off, desperate to feel normal. But the first night I heard something knock beneath my floorboards, slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. I realized whatever haunted this town didn't live in stories. It lived underneath us. At first, I convinced myself it was pipes. Old houses made noise, especially in winter. That explanation worked, until the knocking began to move. It didn't stay in one place. Some nights, it came from directly beneath my bedroom. Other nights, closer to the kitchen, as if something was dragging itself slowly under the house. Stopping only to listen, I started sleeping with the lights on. The silence outside pressed against the walls so hard, it felt louder than noise. When I mentioned it to Mark, his face tightened. He didn't ask questions. He just told me, very clearly, never to look under the house. Cold Lake wasn't far from military land, and rumors were common. Training accidents, abandoned tunnels, things buried and forgotten. But this felt personal, intentional. One night, around 2:17 a.m., the knocking stopped entirely. In its place came something worse. Breathing. Slow, wet, patient. It came from below the floor, directly under my bed, matching my rhythm like it was learning me. I lay frozen, realizing with growing dread that whatever was down there knew exactly where I was. The next morning, I checked the house for any logical explanation. The crawlspace access was outside, sealed with a warped wooden hatch I hadn't noticed before. Snow around it was undisturbed, which should have reassured me. But it didn't. Whatever was under my house didn't need to come in from outside. At work, my focus slipped. Every sound felt amplified. When I finally asked a coworker about disappearances around Cold Lake, the room went quiet. One man told me, carefully, that some houses were built over old service trenches, spaces never properly filled in. People reported noises, shadows, the sense of being watched from below. That evening, Mark knocked on my door for the first time. He looked older than he had days ago. He asked if I'd heard the breathing yet. When I didn't answer, he nodded like he already knew. He told me the last tenant left suddenly. Truck abandoned, wallet still inside. The only thing missing was the crawlspace hatch. As night fell, the silence returned, thicker than before. Like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. That night, I heard it speak for the first time. It wasn't a voice the way humans understand one. It sounded like pressure, air forcing its way through something narrow, a strained imitation of speech. My name came through the floorboards, broken into syllables, like it was being tested. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The thing below did both for me. The floor creaked as weight shifted beneath my bedroom. Slowly, deliberately, it moved toward the crawlspace entrance. I realized with horror that it was learning the house, mapping it the way a hunter maps territory. Then came scratching. Long, careful lines dragged along the underside of the floor, stopping directly beneath the hatch. Something pushed upward, hard enough to rattle the nails. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "If it reaches the door under the house, it will try yours next." I didn't ask how he knew. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and ran into the frozen night barefoot. The sound of something laughing, wrong and hollow, following me from beneath the floor as the house finally exhaled. I spent that night sitting in my truck at a gas station on the edge of town, engine running, heater blasting, watching my house from a distance I hoped was safe enough. The windows stayed dark. No lights, no movement. Just that house, crouched against the forest like it was pretending to be empty. Around 3 a.m., something changed. The porch light flickered on by itself. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't turned it on. No one else had keys. I called Mark. He answered immediately, like he'd been waiting. He told me the thing under the house didn't like being abandoned. It didn't hunt the way animals do, it claimed. If someone lived above it long enough, it started to believe the space belonged to both of us. I asked him how he knew all this. He went quiet, then told me his brother lived in my house before me. When I asked what happened to him, Mark said they never found a body, just an empty crawl space and scrape marks leading deeper than the foundation should allow. By morning, I convinced myself I needed proof. Something solid enough to justify leaving my job, breaking my lease, uprooting my life. Fear alone didn't feel like enough. So against every warning, I went back. The crawl space hatch was open. The wood around it was splintered outward, like something had pushed from below. The air coming from inside wasn't cold, it was warm, damp, and smelled like soil and rot. I crouched, phone flashlight shaking in my hand, and aimed the beam downward. The space extended farther than it should have. Farther than any crawl space had a right to. The dirt walls were packed smooth, almost polished, marked with long grooves that looked intentional. Paths, not damage. Then I saw them. Personal items. A wallet, a work badge, a rusted set of keys I recognized from Mark's keychain. Something moved deeper inside, just beyond the reach of the light. I didn't see it clearly, only the suggestion of a shape pulling itself away, retreating slowly, like it knew I'd follow. I slammed the hatch shut, nails bleeding, heart pounding, understanding too late that curiosity was exactly what it wanted. I didn't sleep in the house again, but that didn't mean it let me go. Over the next few days, my phone began to ring at strange hours. No number, no voicemail, just silence on the line. Heavy, breathing silence. Once I swear I heard the faint sound of wood creaking, like someone shifting their weight under a floor. Mark stopped answering my calls. When I drove past his place, his truck was there, engine cold, snow piled on the hood. The front door stood open. Inside, everything was untouched. Coffee half drunk, TV paused, boots by the door. The crawlspace hatch in his house was gone entirely, leaving a jagged hole in the floor like a mouth torn open mid-scream. That night, parked miles away, I felt it again. The sensation of being directly above something. I looked down at the frozen ground beneath my boots and felt an impossible certainty settle in my chest. It didn't need my house anymore. It had learned me. And wherever I stood still long enough, it could reach. I quit my job the next morning. No notice, no explanation. I drove south without a plan, sleeping in my truck, never staying anywhere more than one night. The knocking followed, not loud, not obvious, but always there when things grew quiet. Under motel floors, beneath rest stop bathrooms, once, faintly, under the cab of my truck. Weeks later, I checked local news from Cold Lake. Another disappearance, then another. Always the same pattern. Empty homes, open crawl spaces, no signs of struggle. I thought distance would save me. I was wrong. Last night, in a city hundreds of miles away, I woke to the sound of breathing beneath my apartment floor. Slow, familiar, patient. The building is concrete. There shouldn't be any space below me. But when I pressed my ear to the ground, I heard it move, adjusting itself directly underneath my chest. Whatever lives beneath Cold Lake doesn't belong to that town. It belongs to the people who listen too long. And tonight, as I write this, it's knocking again, right below where I'm standing. I finally understood the pattern when I stopped running. Every time I fled, it followed faster. Every time I stayed still, it waited. The thing beneath didn't chase, it settled. It chose places where fear rooted itself deep enough to hollow out the ground. I returned to Cold Lake one last time, not because I wanted answers, but because I wanted it contained. The town looked smaller than I remembered, quieter. Several houses were boarded up now. Others stood open, abandoned in a hurry no one talked about. Mark's house had been condemned. Yellow tape hung loose, flapping softly in the wind. I stepped inside anyway. The floor had collapsed completely. What lay beneath wasn't a crawl space anymore. It was a vertical shaft, descending into darkness, walls smooth as if worn down by years of use. I dropped a flare. It fell too long. As the red light faded, I heard movement rising, multiple points of pressure shifting upward, eager, responsive. It wasn't one thing, it was a system. And Cold Lake was just where it learned how to grow. I don't live above ground anymore. That's the part people don't understand when I tell this story. I didn't escape it. I adapted. I found places where concrete meets bedrock, where nothing hollow exists beneath me. It's the only way I can sleep. Cold Lake was quietly erased from my life, but not from the map. People still move there. Houses still get rented. Floors still creak at night. Sometimes I get emails from strangers asking about my old address. They say they hear knocking. They say the silence feels wrong. I never reply, because I know what happens next. The thing beneath doesn't kill quickly. It waits until you stop listening, until the fear becomes routine, until you forget it's there. And then, one night, the floor doesn't knock back. It opens. If you ever find yourself in a quiet town where the ground feels too still, don't investigate. Don't listen closely. And whatever you do, never live above empty space. My name is Caleb Morrison, and this happened when I was 32, working night maintenance near Drumheller, Alberta. Most people think of fossils and badlands when they hear that name. Tourists, museums, dinosaurs frozen in stone. What they don't think about is how empty it becomes after dark, and how the land seems to remember things long after people forget them. I was hired to maintain lighting along a decommissioned service road near the Badlands. The job was simple. Keep the emergency lamps running so hikers didn't wander where they shouldn't. Every light had a number. Every night, I checked them one by one, except one. Pole 17 never stayed lit. I'd replace the bulb, test the wiring, even bring a backup generator. By the next night, it would be dark again. No damage, no burn marks, just off. Locals told me to stop trying. They said that light marked a place where people used to go missing. I laughed it off, until I realized pole 17 wasn't failing. It was being turned off. The first time I noticed the pattern, I wished I hadn't. Every incident report tied to that stretch of land happened on nights when pole 17 was dark. Lost hikers, abandoned vehicles, search crews finding footprints that ended abruptly, like someone stepped off the edge of reality itself. I started arriving early, parking my truck where I could see the pole from a distance. At exactly 1:11 a.m., the light flickered. Not out, but inward, collapsing into itself like it was being swallowed. No sparks, no sound, just gone. That's when I saw the silhouette beneath it. Tall, too still. It didn't cast a shadow, even under moonlight. It stood exactly where the light should have reached, like it was waiting for darkness to finish its work. I radioed it in. Dispatch told me there was nothing on the cameras. When I looked back, the silhouette was closer. No footsteps, no movement, just nearer than before. And for the first time since taking the job, I understood why Drumheller's nights felt watched. The dark here wasn't empty, it was occupied. After that night, I couldn't stop watching pole 17. I reviewed old maintenance logs going back years. Different names, different handwriting, same complaint. Light failure, cause unknown. One technician had written a single sentence in red ink. It doesn't like the light. No explanation, no follow-up. I asked my supervisor about it the next day. He told me to focus on my assigned route and stop digging into things that didn't concern me. His voice wasn't angry, just afraid. When I pushed harder, he finally admitted no one stayed on the night shift longer than 6 months. They always quit, or transferred, or vanished from the schedule without notice. That evening, I brought a high-powered floodlight and mounted it on my truck, aiming it directly at pole 17. If something was turning the light off, I wanted to see how it reacted. At 1:11 a.m., the floodlight dimmed. Not shut off, dimmed, like something thick passed in front of it. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest, and in that half-light, I saw movement. Not walking, not crawling, but unfolding, as if the darkness itself was standing up. I should have driven away. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Instead, I stepped out of the truck. The silence was immediate and complete. No wind, no insects. Even my radio went dead, frozen on a hiss that sounded disturbingly like breathing. The silhouette beneath pole 17 was clearer now, not detailed, but wrong. Its edges bent inward, like it was folded from shadow instead of flesh. I took one step forward, and the ground shifted beneath my boot. Not loose rock, something hollow. I froze, realizing the earth here wasn't solid. It was layered, like skin stretched over emptiness. The silhouette tilted its head. Lights along the road began shutting off one by one, counting down toward me. 6, 5, 4. I ran back to my truck as the last light behind me died. The engine struggled, coughing like it didn't want to start. In the rearview mirror, I saw the silhouette move for the first time. Not forward, but upward, rising taller than the light pole itself. And as I sped away, every light behind me stayed dark, as if the land had decided night should never end. I couldn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the silhouette rising behind the light pole, taller than any human should be, bending and folding the darkness like it owned the night. I tried to convince myself it was stress. Too many long shifts alone in the desert. Too many nights staring at empty poles. But the feeling followed me everywhere. Shadows twisted unnaturally around corners. Streetlights flickered when I walked beneath them. Even my own reflection seemed delayed, like it was hesitant to show me what lurked behind. Finally, I decided to confront it. I returned to pole 17 at dusk, armed with 2 floodlights, a camera, and every recording device I could find. If I captured evidence, I could prove I wasn't losing my mind. As darkness fell, the silhouette emerged again. It didn't move normally. It unfolded like a shadow being pressed out of something tight. The wind stilled. The rocks grew blacker than night. And I realized this wasn't a creature in space. It was the space itself. I raised the camera, shaking, and started filming. Every flicker of light showed the silhouette folding into itself, stretching impossibly, like it was breathing through the emptiness. My heart pounded so hard, I thought the floodlights would shake with it. The wind suddenly picked up, carrying a faint whisper across the rocks. Not words, not language, just something alive and ancient, stretching through the night. Then I heard it behind me. A soft scraping sound, like claws on stone, but from the air itself, I spun around. Nothing. Only the vast expanse of jagged rocks, silent and still. I turned back to the pole, and the silhouette was closer. It wasn't moving. It had moved. Faster than physics, faster than I could react. Its edges blurred the line between darkness and solidity, stretching toward the camera like it wanted to consume everything in the frame. I dropped the camera, yelling, and scrambled into my truck. The floodlights sputtered and died as I slammed the door. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was the shadow folding over itself again, as if satisfied I had finally noticed it. I didn't return for a week. I couldn't. The mere thought of pole 17 made my stomach twist, my hands shake, my chest tighten. I scoured news reports, social media, anything that might explain what I had seen. Nothing. No missing persons that night. No strange shadows reported by hikers. Just the usual tourist articles about dinosaur bones and Badlands photography. Finally, curiosity and fear drove me back. I parked my truck at a safe distance, binoculars in hand. The road was empty. The wind whispered through the rocks. And there it was, the silhouette, smaller now, crouched at the base of the unlit pole, almost human in posture, but too sharp, too angular. I watched as it shifted. Slowly, the shadow's form extended upward, folding over itself like smoke pressed through a mold. Each time I blinked, it seemed closer. Every instinct screamed to leave. But I couldn't look away. This was not a creature that moved through space. It moved through perception. And now, it was learning mine. I finally gathered the courage to step closer, my boots crunching on frozen dirt and scattered stones. The silhouette didn't react, but the air around it shifted, heavy and charged, as if I had disturbed a threshold I shouldn't cross. My flashlight caught edges of it, shadows folding in impossible angles, limbs that weren't limbs, darkness that wasn't just the absence of light. Then came a whisper, soft but clear. "Why do you watch?" The voice wasn't human. It vibrated inside my skull, bending the world around me. I dropped the flashlight, scrambling back to my truck. The shadows along the road began to writhe and crawl toward me, following the light or the absence of it. I slammed the door, engine roaring, tires digging into gravel, and drove away faster than I thought possible. Behind me, I watched through the rearview mirror as every other light along the route went out, one by one. Pole 17 stayed dark, and the silhouette folded taller than the pole itself, watching me leave. I realized then, darkness in Drumheller didn't wait for night. It waited for witnesses. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night, every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally. The memory of the silhouette folding into itself, stretching taller than the light pole, haunted my dreams. I tried returning to normal life, friends, work, meals. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt that same heavy air pressing down, the whisper curling inside my skull. I decided I needed answers. I returned one final time during daylight, hoping that the morning sun might make the shadow retreat. But when I reached pole 17, there was nothing. No silhouette, no darkness. Just the pole and rocks, as if nothing had happened. My camera lay discarded at the base, its memory card missing. As I turned to leave, I noticed faint footprints in the dust. They didn't belong to me or any animal I knew. They led toward the cliffs and then vanished midair, as if something had lifted off the ground entirely. I understood then. Whatever had been waiting under pole 17 wasn't bound by the earth. It waited for attention, and it never forgets. That night, I received a message I'll never forget. No number, no words, just an image. Pole 17, illuminated by its light. But the shadow at its base was now clearly human-shaped, standing perfectly still, perfectly dark, with edges folding unnaturally in every direction. The timestamp read exactly 1:11 a.m., the same as before. I didn't need proof anymore. I knew it could appear anywhere, anywhere I looked, anywhere I least expected. I packed my bags and left Drumheller for good. But even here, in the city, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night to feel a presence folding just behind the corner of the room. Not moving, waiting, learning. I never told anyone the full story, not because they wouldn't believe me, but because I know it would find them too. Darkness in Drumheller doesn't forgive curiosity. It doesn't forgive attention, and it never forgets. If you ever find yourself walking alone at night in the Badlands, keep your eyes on the light. Or better yet, don't look at it at all. My name is Lena Harper, and this happened when I was 24, working the night shift at a small diner in Banff, Alberta. I had moved there for the mountains, the quiet, and a sense of safety I thought only small towns could offer. The streets were empty by 10, the lights soft, the mountains looming like silent guardians. But sometimes, the shadows weren't silent. It started with small things. Cups moved on their own. Doors I remembered locking were open in the morning. I chalked it up to tiredness. Then I began noticing a figure in the reflections of the diner windows at night. A man-shaped shadow standing just beyond the neon glow, never moving closer, never leaving. One night, I walked home down Banff Avenue. The street was empty, fog curling around the lampposts. Then I felt it, eyes watching, but no one there. My pace quickened. Every shadow along the buildings seemed wrong. Too long, too thick, stretching across the cobblestones like liquid darkness waiting for a shape. And then, I heard footsteps behind me. The footsteps didn't match mine. They were slower, deliberate, echoing in a way that made the street feel smaller. I stopped. The air thickened, like it was holding its breath with me. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. The fog swirled unnaturally, hiding corners that should have been visible in the lamplight. I hurried, heart pounding, and the footsteps accelerated. Not running, just keeping pace, always behind. My apartment was only a few blocks away, but those blocks stretched endlessly. The shadows seemed to anticipate every turn, always waiting where I would be next. When I finally reached my door, keys shaking in my hands, the footsteps stopped. Silence fell, so complete it pressed against my ears. I looked up at the street, expecting to see someone, anything. only fog, stretching and curling like smoke, moved as if it had a life of its own. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, the street stretched out before me, empty, except for the slow, deliberate shadow keeping pace. The next day, I tried to rationalize it. Banff was small. Everyone knew everyone. Maybe it was a prank, someone following me after work, someone testing how far they could scare a newcomer. But when I asked around, no one had seen anyone on the street that night. No footprints, no cars, nothing. I started noticing other signs. The diner windows reflected shadows that weren't mine. At work, coffee cups teetered before tipping over on their own. Doors opened slightly when I passed. Even the old jukebox seemed to hum in an odd rhythm, not from the music, but from vibration, like it was resonating with something unseen. That night, I resolved to face it. I walked the avenue with a friend, flashlight in hand, hoping numbers might make it real or harmless. But halfway down the street, the fog thickened unnaturally. The neon reflected dozens of shadowy figures along the walls, all stretching and bending impossibly toward me, merging into one dark, shifting mass. I ran, and for the first time, I felt something brush my shoulder, a cold, living weight. After that night, I refused to walk alone. I tried driving everywhere, but the shadows didn't care about cars. Sometimes they appeared in the reflections of mirrors, behind the windshield, always maintaining the same slow, deliberate pace. I noticed a pattern. They only moved when I looked away. One evening, I stayed late at the diner, closing up at 2 a.m., waiting for the fog to lift. As I turned off the lights, I heard a whisper from outside. My name, drawn out slowly. I froze. The fog shifted and revealed a tall, featureless figure leaning against a lamppost, perfectly still, but watching. I tried to leave calmly, but the figure appeared in every reflection as I moved toward my car. Windows, shiny spoons, even the chrome handle of my truck. No matter which way I turned, it was behind me, just beyond reach, stretching taller, bending in angles that shouldn't exist, folding over itself like smoke. That night, I realized the shadows weren't just following me. They were learning me, anticipating me, studying every step, every breath. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Every night, the fog thickened along Banff Avenue, stretching shadows that didn't belong, folding them into corners and doorways where nothing should exist. I began taking notes, trying to track movement, patterns, anything that could explain it. The shadows weren't random. They were strategic. Waiting near alleyways, stretching across intersections, lingering where I had paused before. They were learning my habits. One night, I decided to confront them. I walked with a flashlight and a camera, recording everything. The fog thickened faster than natural. Shapes formed along the walls, bending, stretching, merging into one tall figure. Featureless, black, and impossible. I shone the light directly at it. Nothing happened, except the shadows behind me elongated, connecting to the figure like veins of darkness spreading across the street. I felt cold air brush past my face. The whisper came again, a soft, deliberate hiss. "Why do you look?" My heart slammed. I realized this wasn't a prank or stress. It was intelligent. It knew curiosity would draw me in, and it fed on it. I ran toward my truck, camera bouncing against my chest, fog thick enough to claw at my vision. When I reached the vehicle, the silhouette was gone, but the shadows were not. They clung to the edges of the street, crawling, pooling where lamplight should have been. I tried starting the engine, fumbling with my keys, heart hammering. And then I saw movement inside the fog. Shapes folding, rising, mimicking the forms of objects around me. A lamppost appeared taller, bending toward me. A parked truck seemed to melt into darkness. Every step I took toward safety was mirrored by the fog, folding around me like a trap. Finally, the engine roared to life. I floored the gas pedal, tires skidding on wet cobblestones, fog swirling around the truck. When I looked back, the tall figure was standing in the middle of the avenue again, perfectly still, folding impossibly over itself, watching me leave. I understood then. The shadows didn't chase. They waited, and they remembered. I tried ignoring it for a week. I didn't walk Banff Avenue alone. I drove everywhere, kept my apartment lights on, and avoided mirrors when possible. But the shadows didn't care about my precautions. They appeared in reflections in the corner of my eyes, always folding, always stretching, always waiting. I realized then they didn't need proximity. They needed attention. One night, curiosity broke me. I returned with a tripod and a high-definition camera, determined to capture it on video. I set it up across from pole 23, the street where the shadows seemed strongest. I pressed record and stepped back. Within minutes, the fog thickened unnaturally. Shadows elongated, merging into one impossibly tall figure, its edges bent in ways that shouldn't exist, folding over itself like liquid night. The whisper came again, carried on a windless breeze. You look, you see, you feed. I froze. It wasn't threatening. Not yet. It was studying, calculating, waiting for me to make a move that would cost more than I could imagine. I watched through the camera lens, frozen as the figure began moving. Slowly, deliberately, folding over itself with impossible geometry, each step bending shadows along the walls and cobblestones. My own shadow stretched unnaturally toward it, as if the darkness wanted to touch me, to pull me in. I tried speaking, calling it out, but no sound came from my throat. My voice was swallowed. The fog thickened, obscuring everything beyond 20 feet. Shapes began crawling toward me along the edges of the street, thin strands of black smoke folding into one another. When I looked up, the figure was closer. Not walking, not running, just there, folding itself taller, bending toward me, anticipating my next move. Every instinct screamed to leave. I grabbed the camera and ran. The shadows rippled in response, reaching out like liquid fingers across the cobblestones. That night, I realized the figure wasn't just haunting Banff Avenue. It was teaching the fog, the shadows, the street itself how to follow, how to fold, and how to wait for the next person who dared to look too closely. I couldn't escape the shadows, even when I left Banff for weeks. I moved to a different city, but every time I closed my eyes, the fog returned. Banff Avenue stretched infinitely before me, cobblestones slick and reflective, neon lights glowing faintly in the mist. The tall figure waited, folding, stretching, merging with every shadow in sight. I realized then that it didn't need to be physically present. It existed in perception, in memory, in attention. The more I thought about it, the more it spread, embedding itself in mirrors, in reflections, in the edges of every streetlight. One night, I received a message on my phone. No sender, no text, just a photo. Banff Avenue at night. The fog was thick, and at the center the folded figure loomed taller than ever, perfectly still, perfectly black, waiting. The timestamp read 1:11 a.m., the same as before. I understood completely. The shadows followed curiosity. They learned from fear. And they never forgot a single step. I can't go back. I don't walk alone at night. Mirrors in my apartment distort slightly. Shadows in corners bend where they shouldn't. And I know that wherever I look too closely, they are learning. The last message I received was different. It wasn't a photo, it was a video. Banff Avenue, empty, neon flickering. And then, folding itself taller than the lampposts, the shadow appeared. It moved slowly toward the camera, but not in a straight line. It folded over, bent, twisted, and somehow, with every movement, it seemed to consume the street itself. I didn't respond. I didn't send the video to anyone. Because I know it will find those who pay attention, those who look too closely, and it will follow them. Folding, stretching, waiting for the next person who dares to watch. The shadows of Banff Avenue aren't gone. They never were. And they are patient. My name is Ethan Reynolds, and this happened when I was 26 on a summer camping trip near Jasper, Alberta. I had been hiking with two friends, Sam and Mia, deep into the Rockies. The trails were quiet, almost unnaturally so, and the air had a sharp, biting clarity that made every sound echo. We set up camp near a small, isolated clearing beside a narrow creek. The first night was peaceful. Stars blanketed the sky, and we laughed around the fire. But as midnight approached, I noticed something odd. The forest seemed too still. Not a rustle, not a bird, not even the creek's gentle flow. Then I saw them. Shadows moving along the tree line, tall and thin, gliding without sound. I blinked, and they vanished. I shrugged it off as tricks of the firelight. But Mia froze, whispering that she saw faces in the darkness, peering at us from between the trees. By the time we crawled into our tents, the forest felt alive with eyes. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a strange silence. The wind had stopped, the creek's gurgle disappeared, and the forest was pressing inward. I peeked out of my tent and saw Mia staring into the trees, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Suddenly, the shadows emerged, taller than any human, their limbs bending at impossible angles. They didn't walk. They glided, folding in on themselves like smoke. Sam stirred, murmuring in his sleep, and one of the shadows leaned toward him. I froze, unable to breathe. Then, without warning, the shadow dissolved into the fog. Sam sat up, blinking. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I nodded, too terrified to speak. The shadows seemed to vanish when noticed directly, only to reappear where attention faltered. By dawn, everything seemed normal again. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, just the forest and our campsite bathed in gentle morning light. But we all knew, without saying it, that something had been watching, and it wasn't finished. We tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves it was exhaustion, shadows playing tricks in the fog, or maybe a family of deer moving near the tree line. But that night, sleep refused me. Every sound in the forest seemed exaggerated, the snap of a twig, the whisper of wind through branches. My eyes refused to close without seeing movement in the darkness. Around midnight, the shadows returned. They didn't glide this time. They emerged from the fog, slowly, deliberately, folding into themselves like living ink. Mia screamed as one passed directly behind her tent, and the air felt heavy, pressing against our lungs. I grabbed my flashlight, but the beams bent around them, illuminating nothing, leaving only the impression of movement. We realized something horrifying. These shadows weren't just stalking us. They were hunting. Each step we took, each breath we drew, seemed to guide them closer, folding the darkness into paths that led straight to our campsite. The forest had become a predator, and we were the prey. By the third night, our nerves were shredded. Every attempt to leave the campsite failed. The forest seemed to shift around us, trails disappearing, familiar landmarks warped. We could hear whispers, soft, almost pleading, yet not human, echoing through the fog. One evening, we decided to climb the ridge above our campsite to scout a path out. The moment we stepped into the clearing, the shadows appeared beneath the trees, taller than ever, folding toward us, their forms stretching and bending in impossible angles. They didn't attack, they just watched, a presence that pressed into our minds. When Mia tried taking a photo, the camera malfunctioned, the images corrupted. Every flash revealed nothing but darkness, as if the forest itself consumed the light. I realized then, this place wasn't haunted by a creature. It was haunted by perception. The forest remembered fear, folded it into shadows, and returned it to anyone who dared intrude. By the time we descended, the fog had swallowed the ridge entirely. Nothing looked familiar. By the fourth night, exhaustion had set in. Our food was running low, and the forest seemed to tighten around us with each passing hour. Every time we tried to leave, the trees rearranged themselves, or the fog thickened so densely we could barely see our hands in front of our faces. It was as if the forest itself was alive, folding the paths and shadows to trap us. Around midnight, I woke to find Mia gone. The tent flap was open, and a cold breeze carried her absence across the campsite. Sam and I called her name, our voices swallowed by the stillness. Then, in the distance, a faint whisper, "You're next." I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the sound, Sam following closely. The shadows stretched taller as we approached, folding and bending into shapes that should not exist. My flashlight flickered. When it stabilized, Mia stood ahead, her figure featureless, completely black, like one of the shadows themselves. She didn't speak, just reached out toward me. I stumbled back, heart pounding. This wasn't her. Not anymore. I screamed, lunging toward Mia, but my hands passed through her like fog. The forest seemed to pulse, shadows bending inward, folding around us. Sam grabbed my arm, shouting that we had to leave, but every step toward the main trail led us back to the same clearing. The shadows weren't following. They were shaping the space itself. Trees twisted impossibly, rocks shifted, the fog coiled around our legs. And then, from the center of the clearing, a new figure emerged. Taller, darker, folding its limbs into angles that defied nature. It didn't move toward us, yet the weight of its presence pushed us back, like gravity had reversed. I realized the horrifying truth. The shadows weren't just stalking campers. They were the forest. They were the fog. They were the fear we carried inside us, folded and returned, amplified. By the time we collapsed against a tree, shivering and gasping, the forest fell silent again. But we knew it was waiting. Patient, always folding, always watching. The next day, we tried to rationalize everything again. Maybe exhaustion, maybe hallucinations from hunger and fear. But as we packed our gear, we noticed signs we couldn't explain. Footprints leading away from the tents vanished mid-step. Impressions in the dirt that twisted unnaturally, as if the ground itself rejected the mark of a human. We decided to leave immediately. Every step toward the main trail seemed longer than before. The forest was alive, folding around us, obscuring landmarks we thought we knew. Then, from the fog, shadows emerged. Not one, but dozens, crawling along the edges of the clearing, folding into each other, forming shapes that defied human anatomy. They didn't chase us. They blocked us, bending the space like it was clay. By the time we reached a small ridge, breathless and terrified, I understood. The forest didn't need to touch us. It controlled the paths, the fog, the shadows, and it could do it endlessly, patiently, watching, learning, waiting for the next campers to arrive. That night, desperation took over. We tried moving in circles to confuse the shadows, but every direction folded back into the clearing. The fog thickened into an almost solid wall, and the shadows became denser, bending over themselves, forming shapes that resembled our friends, our fears, even our own bodies. We shouted, cried, and ran blindly through the mist. Every sound echoed unnaturally, every step warped as if the forest itself mocked us. Then we saw it, a massive, featureless figure at the center of the clearing, folding impossibly, its edges stretching to the treetops. The shadows connected to it, crawling across the forest floor, weaving together like veins of darkness. We froze, paralyzed by a realization. The forest didn't need to attack. Its patience was its power. It folded us into fear, learning every reaction, every hesitation. If we survived this night, it wouldn't be because we escaped. It would be because it allowed us to leave. By dawn, exhaustion forced us to stumble blindly toward what we hoped was the trail out. The fog thinned slightly, revealing the clearing once more. But it looked different, twisted, like someone had folded the earth overnight. The shadows lingered, merging with the trees, bending light, stretching impossibly along the forest floor. Mia whispered that she could see shapes moving in our peripheral vision, tall forms folding and unfolding with every step we took. Sam clutched my arm, muttering that the forest itself was alive, watching our every move. I couldn't argue. I could feel it too, a consciousness in the fog, patient and calculated, folding the space around us. We reached the edge of the tree line, exhausted and shaking. For a moment, we thought we were free. Then I noticed the footprints beside us. They weren't ours, and they didn't belong to anything human. They led back into the forest and vanished mid-step, like the earth itself swallowed them. We didn't look back, not once. But we knew it remembered us. Weeks later, even miles away, the forest still haunted me. Every night, shadows appeared in reflections, stretching in angles that shouldn't exist, folding silently in corners of my room. I received a photo on my phone with no sender. The clearing at Jasper, fog thick and curling, the massive folded figure at the center, its edges stretching impossibly into the trees. I knew then that the forest didn't just trap us physically. It folded our fear into something permanent, something that could travel with memory, with attention. Every camper who dares enter that clearing becomes part of it, folded into its shadows, studied by its patience. Mia and Sam never fully recovered, and I never returned to Jasper. I warn anyone who dares go there, respect the forest. Don't look too closely. Don't linger. Because once it folds you into its shadows, you might never leave. My name is Jared Thompson, and this happened when I was 28, traveling through Medicine Hat, Alberta, on a cross-country road trip. I had booked a room at a small roadside motel just outside the city, hoping for a quiet night before resuming my journey. The neon sign flickered weakly, buzzing in the warm summer air. The place seemed deserted, but cheap motels often are. The room itself looked normal, if a little worn, peeling wallpaper, threadbare carpet. But there was an oppressive heaviness in the air that made me uneasy. The first few hours passed uneventfully. But as midnight approached, the room grew colder, and the lights flickered. Shadows stretched across the walls unnaturally, bending at impossible angles. I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing soft scratching, like fingernails dragging across the walls. At first, I thought it was mice or pipes. But then I noticed the mirror across the room. Something moved in it, something that didn't match my own reflection. And then I realized the reflection was smiling at me. I froze, staring at the mirror. The figure didn't move its lips, but the smile widened, stretching impossibly across its face. My heart pounded as the lights flickered faster. I backed away, and the reflection followed, folding itself in angles that made no sense, a dark shape that didn't belong to any human form. The scratching grew louder, coming from behind the walls, above the ceiling, below the floor. The air felt thick, pressing down on me. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Every reflection in the room, the TV screen, the window, even the shiny doorknob, revealed the same figure, its form bending, folding, growing taller, studying me. Then, a whisper from the mirror. "Why are you here?" It wasn't a voice I could hear, but one that pressed directly into my mind, making my skull thrum. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed, my eyes fixed on the figure that refused to stay in its reflection. The night had only just begun, only I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure in the mirror, its smile stretching wider, bending into shapes that should not exist. The scratching continued, now accompanied by a soft, wet thumping coming from inside the walls. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like the motel itself was breathing around me. I finally gathered the courage to investigate. I slowly approached the bathroom, the mirror reflecting every step I took. But the figure was already closer, folding across the reflection, taller than the doorframe, stretching toward me. I reached for the light switch, and for a split second, the room was illuminated fully. When the light stabilized, the figure was gone, but its shadow remained, stretching along the walls, bending into impossible angles, as if mocking my relief. By morning, the motel seemed normal. No strange reflections, no thumping, nothing. But I didn't feel safe. The feeling of being watched lingered, pressing against my back like an invisible weight. I knew it was only resting. The second night was worse. I tried to stay awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on every reflective surface. The mirror in the bathroom pulsed softly, as if it were alive. Then I saw it again. The figure wasn't just in the mirror. It was folding itself through the corners of the room, stretching along the ceiling, bending behind furniture, always just out of reach. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whisper returned. "Why are you awake?" I could feel it pressing into my chest, making my heartbeat echo in my skull. I stumbled toward the door, only to see its shadow reflected on the carpet, growing longer, bending over itself like liquid darkness. The walls seemed to pulse with every step I took. The motel room had become a trap, folding in on itself. The figure's presence wasn't just watching me anymore. It was rearranging the space around me, preparing for something I couldn't yet understand. By 3 a.m., I realized this night wouldn't end until it decided it had enough. By the third night, fear had taken full control. I didn't move without scanning the room first, flashlight in hand, checking every reflective surface, TV screen, doorknob, even the bathroom tiles. But it didn't matter. The figure appeared where I least expected it, folding into corners, stretching along walls, bending the room in ways that made no sense. The whisper returned, stronger now, pressing into my mind. "Why do you resist?" I stumbled back against the wall, my hand sliding across peeling wallpaper, only to feel it ripple like skin beneath my fingers. The floorboards creaked, though no one was there. Then I noticed the shadows in the corners. They weren't just shapes. They were extensions of the figure, moving with intelligence, folding over themselves, pooling into darker shapes. The motel had become a living nightmare, and I was the prey. By midnight, I realized it wasn't going to stop. The figure wasn't content with just haunting reflections. It wanted to consume the room itself, folding me into its presence. I tried to escape. I grabbed my keys and swung open the door. But the hallway stretched farther than it should, folding back on itself, lined with shadows that bent like liquid around the walls. The neon sign outside flickered, but the light didn't reach me. The motel had become its own maze. The figure emerged from the reflection in the hallway mirror, impossibly tall. Edges folding into the walls, limbs bending like smoke. Froze, heart pounding, realizing it didn't need to chase me. It only needed to control the space, folding every inch into its presence. I ran blindly down the hall, door after door leading me back to the same room. Each one distorted, each reflection showing the figure closer than before. It whispered again, insidiously, "You belong to me now." By 3 a.m., I understood. The motel itself was alive. And it had decided I would never leave as long as I looked too closely, as long as I remembered its presence. By the fourth night, I realized fighting or escaping was pointless. Every reflective surface became a portal for the figure. Even the small window in my room seemed to bend and fold, showing shadows moving outside that didn't exist in the real world. I tried covering mirrors, turning off lights, even closing my eyes. But the figure found a way. It didn't need to be seen to exist. It was everywhere, folding the room, bending reality. At one point, I thought I saw my own reflection move independently, folding into itself as though my image had been claimed by the figure. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the bed, heart hammering. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, pressing into my mind. "You can't hide. You will belong." I finally understood. This wasn't just haunting. The motel had become a living entity, an extension of the figure. Every room, every corridor, every reflection folded toward it. I was trapped inside its mind, and it was patient. Desperation set in. I grabbed my backpack, trying to escape once more, moving toward the hallway. But the corridor seemed longer than before, stretching into impossible geometry. The lights flickered violently, revealing the figure folding across the walls, ceiling, and floor, each movement bending space unnaturally. The shadows weren't just following, they were extending. Tiny tendrils of darkness crawled along the carpet, along the bed, curling toward me. I tried to shout, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive presence. The figure's whisper slithered into my thoughts. "We fold fear into ourselves. You belong to us now." I ran blindly, each step leading back to the same room, the figure waiting silently in the reflection, edges folding and twisting like smoke. It didn't move. It was the motel. Every step, every breath, every glance reinforced its control. I realized, with a sickening clarity, that I wasn't just trapped physically. I was trapped mentally, folded into its presence, and there was no way out. By the fifth night, exhaustion and terror had merged into a numb awareness. Every reflective surface was a reminder that the figure was always folding, always watching, always waiting. I realized that leaving wasn't about walking out the door. It was about surviving the presence that had claimed the space. I tried a new tactic. I turned off all the lights, closed the curtains, and sat in the middle of the room, pretending the room and its mirrors didn't exist. The whispers faded slightly, but I could still feel the figure folding closer, shaping the shadows to its will. The air itself seemed thick, bending around me, pressing in like a living thing. Suddenly, the bathroom mirror fogged, and the figure appeared, taller and more folded than ever, stretching to the ceiling, its featureless face tilting unnaturally. I understood then that this motel didn't just host the figure. It was the figure. Every wall, every floorboard, every reflection folded into it, and anyone who stayed became a permanent part of its twisted architecture. At dawn, I managed to stumble outside. The morning sun seemed weak, unable to penetrate the motel's oppressive aura. I didn't look back, but I could feel its presence folding around the building, stretching invisibly into the parking lot, into the air, into my mind. Even weeks later, the memory of the motel haunted me. Mirrors in my apartment would ripple slightly, shadows folding along walls, and I would sense the same whisper pressing into my thoughts. You belong. I never stayed in a motel again. The Medicine Hat Motel wasn't just a building, it was a living nightmare, a space folding fear into every corner, bending reality to trap its visitors forever. If you ever see a flickering neon sign in the distance, promising a quiet night's stay, remember this. Some places aren't meant to be entered. Some shadows never forget who look too closely. My name is Clara Whitman, and this happened when I was 24, working as a nurse in Red Deer, Alberta. One late October evening, I decided to take a short drive along a deserted back road after my shift to clear my mind. The air was crisp, and a dense fog had begun to roll in from the nearby river valley, thick and white, swallowing everything around me. As I drove, the fog seemed to have a life of its own, curling unnaturally, stretching across the road and hiding the forest edges in ghostly folds. I noticed shapes in the fog, tall, black, humanoid forms. But whenever I blinked or focused, they vanished, leaving only the mist and the eerie silence. I pulled over, heart racing, trying to tell myself it was just shadows cast by the streetlights. But the shapes didn't disappear entirely. They shifted, folding in and out of existence, as if the fog itself were alive, watching, learning, studying my every movement. That was when I heard the first whisper, soft, almost intimate. You shouldn't be here. I froze, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The whisper came again, closer, wrapping around my thoughts like smoke. The shapes in the fog began to move, folding, stretching toward the road, though no sound accompanied them. My heart pounded, and I realized that leaving the area might be impossible. The fog seemed to twist and shift, turning every direction back toward the same spot. Panicking, I tried to drive forward, but the road ahead vanished into a wall of white, the lines folding into themselves as if the pavement itself had been bent by some invisible hand. The shapes became clearer, humanoid but impossibly tall, folding over their limbs, moving like liquid darkness. I rolled down the window, hoping the cold night air would anchor me to reality. The whisper echoed again, "You can't leave." My breath fogged in the air, mingling with the mist, and I realized then that the fog wasn't just mist. It was a predator, patient, folding, and relentless. I tried to calm myself, taking slow, deliberate breaths. But the fog seemed to thicken around the car, curling like fingers, pressing against the windows. Shapes moved in the mist, folding over themselves in impossible angles, as if testing the limits of reality. Every blink revealed something new, something taller, darker, watching, studying. Then I noticed the first footprints in the fog, leading alongside the road. They were human-shaped, but the prints folded unnaturally, as if each step bent the earth itself. They moved toward my car, and I could feel the weight of the fog intensifying, as though the shapes were aware of my fear and feeding off it. I turned the key in the ignition, praying the engine would start, but the car refused. The shapes in the fog became clearer, closer, folding in on themselves to create larger forms that filled the road. I understood then, this wasn't a random fog. It was alive, patient, and it had chosen me to witness its folds. I finally forced the car into gear, inching forward as the fog seemed to push back, folding the road in impossible curves. The shadows stretched and folded beside me, keeping pace, always just at the edge of visibility. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, the mist behind the car seemed alive, moving toward me in shapes that were simultaneously humanoid and alien. I shouted, demanding the fog to let me pass, but the whispers pressed into my mind. You shouldn't leave. I slammed the brakes at a sudden curve, and the shapes vanished into the mist. But their absence was worse, leaving only the oppressive emptiness, as if the fog were breathing around me. Somewhere ahead, I saw a faint glow. Streetlights, or perhaps the edge of town. Hope surged, but the fog twisted, folding the road again. Every attempt to escape brought me back toward the same spot, and I realized with terror that the fog had no edges. It was infinite, patient, and it would fold me forever if I lingered too long. By the fifth night, the fog had become relentless. I had returned to the same stretch of road, drawn there by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The shapes in the mist no longer hid. They folded themselves into grotesque forms that were impossible, their long limbs bending at sharp angles, stretching taller than the trees. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, as if they were testing my fear. I stopped the car, heart pounding, and stepped outside. The air was heavy, thick with a strange coldness that pressed down on my shoulders. I could see dozens of figures, folding, stretching, and weaving through the fog. The whispers had grown louder, more distinct, repeating over and over. You belong to us. You belong to us. I tried to run back to the car, but the fog twisted the ground beneath my feet. The road bent in unnatural folds, folding back on itself, leading me deeper into the mist. I understood, with a sinking horror, that the fog didn't just surround me, it controlled me. I stumbled forward, gasping, and the shapes in the fog folded in tighter around me, moving without sound. It was like the mist itself had taken on intelligence, pressing in on all sides, shaping reality into a maze of my own fear. I realized I couldn't outrun it. The fog folded every path back toward the center, back toward the figures. Suddenly, one of the shapes emerged clearly in front of me, impossibly tall, edges folding into itself, face featureless, yet somehow knowing. I froze as the whispers slithered directly into my mind. We fold fear into the world. You are ours. I ran blindly, slipping and falling multiple times, each step folding the ground beneath me in ways I couldn't comprehend. It felt as though I was running through a living painting. Every shadow, every swirl of mist, bending and folding reality to trap me in its presence. When I finally reached the edge of the fog, I looked back, and the shapes had vanished, leaving only the curling mist and a silence that hummed with intent. By the sixth night, I stopped trying to rationalize what was happening. The fog had taken on a presence, alive and patient, folding around the trees, the road, and me. Every time I tried to look away, the shapes twisted, folding themselves into forms that seemed impossible. Humanoid but stretching, bending and amshing with the mist. I realized that even staying still didn't help. The whispers grew louder, echoing inside my mind. You cannot leave. You belong to us. The fog pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. and the shapes shifted, folding over themselves to create a lattice of darkness that blocked any path forward. I tried to call someone for help, but my phone screen was fogged over, the display warped. Even technology refused me. The fog had folded reality itself, bending every escape route back into the heart of the mist. I understood then that it didn't need to capture me physically. The fog itself could fold my fear, my awareness, and my sanity into its endless folds. Desperation drove me forward, moving through the fog blindly, but every step seemed preordained, folded by some invisible hand. The shapes in the mist multiplied, folding over themselves to form grotesque angles, merging into larger silhouettes that stretched toward the sky. A whisper wrapped around my thoughts like tendrils. We fold everything into us. You will join the folds. I shivered as I realized it wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. The fog wasn't merely surrounding me. It was rewriting reality, folding the very road beneath my feet, bending it into itself. I saw another figure appear directly ahead, impossibly tall, faceless, limbs bending at impossible angles. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I realized there was no back. Every direction folded into the fog. I understood with suffocating clarity. The fog of red deer wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was patient, alive, and it could fold anyone who lingered too long into its endless, consuming embrace. By the seventh night, I no longer trusted my own senses. The fog had consumed the road entirely, folding it into an endless white labyrinth. The shapes in the mist were no longer subtle. They were enormous, bending impossibly over trees, folding around telephone poles, twisting space as if it were clay. I could feel the fog pressing in, folding my own thoughts into it, whispering incessantly, "You are ours. You belong to us." I tried to run, but the ground beneath me twisted, folding back into itself, making every step a labyrinthine trap. The figures followed, folding themselves in and out of existence, stretching impossibly tall, merging with the mist in ways that made my head spin. Even the car I had abandoned seemed to warp in the fog, folding and stretching into shapes I couldn't comprehend. By that point, I understood that the fog didn't just envelop the land, it folded time, space, and mind itself, trapping anyone who entered its heart into a reality it controlled entirely. Weeks later, I finally escaped the fog's immediate grasp, stumbling onto a familiar road where the mist thinned. But its presence never left me. Every reflective surface, every patch of mist in my apartment, every shadow seemed to fold unnaturally, echoing the shapes I had seen. The whispers followed, faint but persistent, reminding me that the fog had folded a part of me into itself, that a fragment of my mind still lingered in the endless mist. I warn anyone who drives near red deer on foggy nights. Do not linger. Do not look too closely. The fog folds reality itself. The shapes are patient, intelligent, and they never forget. Somewhere, in the depths of the curling fog, I know the figures watch, folding and refolding, waiting for the next traveler who dares to enter. And I know, with sick certainty, that one day I may return, not physically, but folded into its endless, consuming presence forever. My name is Ethan Walker, and this happened when I was 29, traveling through Drumheller, Alberta, to photograph the Badlands for my blog. I had been warned by locals about the abandoned farms scattered across the valleys, but curiosity got the better of me. One late afternoon, I came across an old farmhouse, isolated and crumbling, with a rusted windmill leaning at an impossible angle. The sun was low, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. As I approached the house, I noticed the air had changed. It was still, unnaturally silent, as though the world itself had paused. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing, and the front door sagged on its hinges. My instincts screamed to leave, but I pressed on, drawn toward the house as if it had called to me. The porch creaked under my weight, and I stepped inside. Dust hung in thick clouds, disturbed by my movement. Then I saw it. Faint footprints in the dust, leading from the kitchen into the dark hallways, as though someone, or something, had been waiting for me. I called out, my voice echoing through the empty rooms, but there was no reply, only silence that pressed against my eardrums. The dust-covered floorboards groaned as I followed the footprints deeper into the house. Every step felt wrong, as if the house itself were aware of my presence, folding space subtly to disorient me. In the corner of the main hallway, I noticed strange marks on the walls, scratches that bent and twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed to crawl toward the ceiling. The air grew colder, thick and heavy, pressing down on my shoulders. I could hear faint whispers, soft and sibilant, echoing through the walls, but no source could be found. I reached the kitchen and noticed a small, worn rocking chair moving slowly back and forth, though there was no breeze. The whispers grew louder, pressing directly into my mind. "You shouldn't be here." My pulse raced, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. Something in that house wanted me to see, to feel, to understand the folds of its silent terror. I backed away from the kitchen, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. But every hallway I turned down seemed to fold and stretch differently, bending in ways that didn't make sense. The footprints continued ahead, disappearing around a corner that should have led to the living room. But the hallway twisted, elongating unnaturally. The whispers grew sharper, almost impatient now. I could feel them pressing into my skull, shaping my thoughts, guiding me deeper into the house. Every shadow seemed to move independently, folding across the walls, crawling toward me as if the house itself were alive. I reached the back of the house and discovered a small room, its door partially ajar. Inside, the walls were covered with strange symbols, jagged lines folding in impossible angles. In the center of the room sat a small, featureless humanoid figure, folded and contorted, almost like a shadow had taken physical form. It didn't move, but I could feel its awareness, as though it had been waiting for me. The house wasn't abandoned. It had been waiting. I tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't budge. The shadows in the corners bent toward me, folding along the walls as though guiding me to stay. I could hear the whispers chanting faintly now. "See what we see. Feel what we feel." I noticed something on the floor. A collection of old photographs, warped and bent unnaturally, each image depicting families in the farmhouse, their faces folded and distorted in ways that made my stomach turn. The featureless figure remained motionless, yet I felt it studying me, folding my fear into itself. I knelt to inspect the photographs closer, and the air grew colder, thicker, folding around me. I realized then that the house wasn't haunted by spirits. It was alive, absorbing, bending everything within it. Memories, fear, reality, folding them into its silent, oppressive presence. I could feel it reaching for me mentally, folding my thoughts, pulling me further into the nightmare that this farm had patiently built over decades. By the fifth night, I had been drawn back to the farmhouse, despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away. The road leading to the property seemed longer, folding unnaturally with each turn, shadows crawling along the edges as if guiding me to the house. I parked the car at the edge of the field and approached, the windmill creaking at an impossible angle, casting long, twisting shadows across the yard. Inside, the air was thicker, heavier, almost solid, pressing against my chest. The whispers were louder now, insistent, repeating, "You will stay. You will belong." The footprints in the dust had multiplied, bending over themselves, leading me to the same room as before. The featureless figure was still there, but this time, it moved. Or rather, the shadows surrounding it folded and stretched, creating the illusion of motion. I realized then that the house didn't just observe, it interacted. Every step I took, every breath I drew, folded me closer into its twisted, patient presence. I tried to leave, but the house's layout had changed. Hallways stretched impossibly, doors led to rooms that hadn't existed before, and the shadows bent in directions that defied logic. The featureless figure remained at the center of the main room, but its presence seemed to extend into every corner, folding the walls, the floor, even the ceiling around itself. I could hear whispers echoing from the walls themselves. Feel the folds. Become one with the silence. The air grew colder still, almost freezing, and the symbols on the walls seemed to ripple, folding like living skin. My own reflection appeared in a cracked mirror, distorted and bending, as if part of me had already been claimed. Panic surged. I ran, but the house folded reality against me, hallways looping back, staircases bending at impossible angles. The figure didn't chase, it didn't need to. The house and its presence had already folded me into its nightmare, making me part of its silence forever. By the seventh night, I had lost all sense of time and direction. The farmhouse had become a labyrinth, folding hallways and rooms into impossible configurations, each turn bringing me back to the same room with a featureless figure. Its presence was oppressive, radiating through the walls, the floor, even the air itself. The whispers had transformed into a chant, a low, insistent rhythm that folded into my thoughts. You belong. You are ours. The shadows surrounding the figure stretched and twisted, bending into angles that made my stomach churn. Every movement I made was mirrored, folded, and reflected back in ways I couldn't comprehend. I realized then that the house itself was alive, absorbing my fear, my confusion, folding me into its silent architecture. The photographs on the floor shifted subtly as I stepped near them, bending reality, showing twisted versions of events that had never happened. Every detail of the house was a fold of time and space, and I was trapped inside its endless, patient presence. Desperation clawed at me as I realized that running would do no good. Every hallway, every doorway, every room folded back toward the figure. The house pulsed like a living organism, folding the air itself, pressing my chest with an invisible weight. The whispers pressed harder, more insistent. We fold fear into everything. You are ours. I tried shouting, trying to break the spell, but my voice was swallowed by the house. The featureless figure's edges unfolded, expanding and contracting like smoke, reaching subtly into the corners, into the ceiling, into the shadows around me. Every instinct screamed to escape, but every escape route folded back into itself, leaving only the room with the figure at the center. I understood finally. This farmhouse wasn't haunted. It was a living presence, folding reality, memories, and fear into itself. Any who entered became a part of its architecture, trapped in silence, forever folded into the folds of the silent farm. By the ninth night, I had accepted that the farmhouse had claimed me in some way. Every attempt to leave only folded the hallways back to the same room, the same figure at the center, featureless yet aware. the shadows now stretched and intertwined, folding over the walls and ceiling like living ink, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. You are ours, forever folded. I noticed that the photographs on the floor had changed again, now depicting me in impossible positions, folded into shadows, melting into the floorboards, merging with the figure. My sense of time had warped. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. Every breath I took was heavy, folded, trapped in the oppressive air of the house. I realized with chilling clarity that the farmhouse did not need to chase me. The house had folded reality to ensure I could never escape. Every step, every thought, every heartbeat had already been woven into its silent, patient nightmare, leaving me a permanent part of the folds I could neither see nor escape. Weeks later, I found myself outside the farmhouse, gasping for air, unsure if it had truly released me or simply allowed me to step back into a portion of reality. The fields were silent, the windmill still. Yet I could feel the folds of the house stretching invisibly, reaching beyond the property into my thoughts. Every reflection I saw carried hints of its presence. Shadows folding unnaturally in mirrors, the corners of rooms bending subtly, reminders that part of me had remained behind. I warn anyone traveling near Drumheller, the silent farm is not abandoned. It is alive, folding time, space, and fear into itself. Those who enter leave a piece of their soul, trapped in the folds forever. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, you can hear the faint whisper, calling for the next visitor to fold into the silent nightmare of the farm. The house does not forget. It waits patiently, folding. As the darkness settles over Alberta's small towns, we've seen how fear can take root in the most ordinary places. Abandoned roads, silent farms, fog-choked valleys, and houses that bend reality itself. These stories were not legends, not myths, and not campfire tales. They were real encounters, lived by ordinary people who stumbled into the extraordinary horrors lurking just beneath the surface. From the creeping fog of red deer to the silent folding presence in Drumheller, we've witnessed landscapes and homes that are anything but safe. Each story reminds us that terror often waits quietly, patient and intelligent, ready to fold reality, fear, and memory into itself. The shadows we ignore, the whispers we dismiss, and the fogs we drive through may not just be scenery. They may be alive, watching, and waiting for the next curious soul. Thank you for joining me through these 7 disturbing Alberta small-town horror stories. Remember, the darkness is always closer than you think. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears,